Welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. The webinar is hosted by Passive House California, and it is Passive House Multifamily, Good for All is Good for One, how Passive House qualities benefit both occupants and owners. And it is presented by Shane Poland. The Passive House California, as I mentioned, is hosting. We are a part of the Passive House Network. We are affiliated with the the International Passive House Association, and also connected with Passive House Institute. That is the email address of our website, passivehousecal.org. If you'd like to take a look there to learn more, become a member, explore, we will be putting this recording up there. So you'll be able to get back to it. So welcome and thank you. And particularly welcome to, I believe there are a number of people here from the Building Decarbonization Coalition, thanks to Sean Armstrong, who provided the suggestion and did help promote it. And of course, with the decarbonization, the building blocks of decarbonization, electrify everything is central to that. In addition, a passive house can provide the maximized efficiency. So you want to maximize efficiency with the envelope and passive house protocols, minimize the embodied carbon for the products and the process of building, and then, as we talked about already, electrify everything, go to clean energy, and you wind up with a zero carbon building. Now, the graphic implies that there's an order, which is accurate in terms of the construction or retrofitting, but in reality, all of the choices in terms of the maximum efficiency and minimize the bottom embodied carbon, electrifying everything, going to clean energy, all of those decisions need to be made at the very beginning of the process, when the integrated team of people working on it will determine the owner's performance requirements for the project. And Shane will be talking about that in much greater detail. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors. Southern California Edison is our gold sponsor and has been for some time. We have silver sponsors, Small Planet Supply, Minutair, and Rockwool. And we have a dozen supporting sponsors. Here you see them: 475 High Performance Building Products, Mitsubishi Electric, Fergus Garber Architects, and CPHBA, which is an external automated shading company, Pete Moffett Construction. The Heinrich team is a Central Coast real estate team that are very dedicated to sustainability and passive house. Earthbound Homes is a builder in the Bay Area. Ream, of course, you would know who Ream is. Prosoco. Hayward Lumber is one of our sponsors and has been for years. Good Space High Performance Builders is another Bay Area, Sacramento related, or Sacramento exactly, builder, and Stiebel Eltron. So they are, thank you to our sponsors for making it possible for us to do the things that we do, like put on a webinar. I also would like to do a shout out to Redwood Energy and Sean Armstrong, who introduced us to Shane Poland and PS Ventures, his company. Shane was a presenter at the Redwood Energy's most recent Zero Carbon Retreat. And he is a LEED accredited professional, holds a bachelor's degree in economics with honors from Vanderbilt University, and is a Juris Doctorate, or has a Juris Doctorate from Tulane University. So he's well educated, but he has worked in real estate ventures in Washington metropolitan area for over 20 years, and a leader in sustainable building developments. Shane curates highly capable teams with a focus on functionality, resiliency, and durability in the built environment. So welcome, Shane, and thank you for being here today and for all that you do to make a difference.
Again, my name is Shane Poland. I'm principal of PS Ventures. That stands for Passionate and Sustainable Ventures. I'm a boutique, if you will, real estate development firm or developer in the lovely state of Maryland. So coming to you from the other coast. And PS Ventures' primary mission is to help develop and design more resilient, more durable, and more efficient buildings. We utilize building science and especially passive building principles. I come to you today after about almost a 20-year career in real estate development. And I think it's relevant to start with where my experience in high performance green buildings started. Way back in the 2005, 2006 era, I was working with members of my family, the Duffy family, members, and the Duffy companies. And we had an opportunity to build ourselves a new corporate headquarters in Silver Spring, Maryland. And we, the Duffy family, have been long-term holders of real estate. The Duffys had several assets, and it was an opportunity to redevelop one of the assets as our corporate headquarters. And as part of that, I was assisting with the new developments and went out to see what kind of building we wanted to build as our next corporate headquarters. And in that process, I found LEED, which I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with, but that's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, a program that was created by the United States Green Building Council. And so way back in 2005, 2006, before LEED was required, which it became ultimately required in our jurisdiction in Montgomery County, Maryland, I went to my family, I'd found LEED, and I said, hey, we are building our new corporate headquarters. I think we should build a high performance green building to this new LEED standard. And my family, initially, their response was no. We're not totally comfortable, understandably, we're not totally comfortable with a green building. We haven't seen any green buildings around here. Who cares about a green building? Show me someone's going to pay more money for a green building. A green building's going to cost too much money. All of the very familiar arguments I think we're probably hearing today for high performance buildings. But for those who know me, I'm relatively persistent. I'm a voracious researcher. And I made a number of arguments for why we as a family who were long-term holders of real estate really should be building to the next standard. There are several reasons, right? As long-term holders, we're responsible for maintenance of the property. We would be responsible ultimately for long-term utility bills of the property. And ultimately, it's a competitive market for real estate, and that we would occupy some of our corporate headquarters, but we would not occupy all of it. And we would therefore be enjoying our space with other tenants who would be signing leases, and that those leases might be for 5 years, they might be for 10 years, but they were not forever. And that ultimately, when those leases expire, we would be out in the market for new tenants. And that if, as I suspected, LEED buildings were going to become popular and in fact required, that we would in relatively short order be competing for tenants with new buildings built to a different standard. And that our choice fundamentally was whether we should be the first of the new high performance green buildings at that time, or whether we wanted to be the last of the old. And that, according to my family, was the winning argument. And so began my journey into high performance green building. My family asked me to try to go easy on the construction costs, not to kill us with soft costs, and try to embark on this goal. We ultimately did build a LEED core and shell for our corporate headquarters. And this was, as many of you know, 2007, 8, 9, as we're going through entitlements, development, building the core building. Not a great time in the real estate industry. And we became aware that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, who was locating about a mile up the street from our corporate headquarters, was outpacing their growth of buildings on the Federal Research Center in Silver Spring, Maryland. And so I then had to go to my family and say, hey, I know we're about to finish our new corporate headquarters that's built to a LEED Gold core and shell standard, but we can't move into it. This was also not terribly well received at the time, but the case that we made was that the federal government was out looking for additional space. Our building is about 50,000 feet. And that while most folks at that time did not really care about high performance green building, the federal government happened to be a group who did care. All of the buildings being constructed on the Federal Research Center up the street were LEED certified buildings. Ultimately, as suspected, Montgomery County in Maryland had required LEED certification of those buildings. And so we ended up competing for an award with the federal government. And at the time, the stipulation was that there was a demand for a request for a proposal for a building within 3 miles of the front gate of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration's consolidated headquarters. And one of the preferences was for a LEED certified building. And at that time, there was only one. And it was our corporate headquarters intended building. We never moved in. We competed for the award. We won the award. That lease ran. We got a 10-year, 100% lease from 2010 through 2020. And then we were fortunate to be able to recompete in 2020 timeframe, and we were awarded a second term, a renewal term for 15 years. And we importantly, and I think I'm very proud that the building, after 10 years of operation, was still able to earn its ENERGY STAR certification. So we did earn LEED Gold Core and Shell, we earned LEED Commercial Interior, and we earned an ENERGY STAR certification. And we were rewarded with all of this with a lease from the federal government. So my history in high performance green building really came at it from a market rate perspective. The project I'm going to tell you about today is a partnership with our local affordable housing authority. But for most of my career, I've been trying to make the case for green building and high performance building in a purely market rate environment. With the success of 10,001 New Hampshire Avenue, we then went and I asked my family, I said, I think it would be great if we could build a high performance multifamily building in the city of Frederick, Maryland, which is northwest of Washington, D.C. And with that, they said, sure, let's go do it. And I really thank my family for being so supportive at that time. At this point, I am no longer an employee of the Duffy Companies, but again, principal with PS Ventures, working on some of the same type of exciting projects, groundbreaking projects, leading projects that I was working with the Duffy Companies. But after that Eastern Market multifamily, we never did move into our headquarters. We built the Duffy headquarters, which to a LEED Platinum standard, again, increasing our depth and scope of knowledge and high performance green building, achieving higher levels of certification. We then were able to tear down our old building that we had been in for a number of years. And we built a LEED Platinum hotel, one of the 7th in North America. So I come at high performance building also with the benefit of having experience across a really wide variety of projects, from retail, hospitality, office, and of course, multifamily. And I think that, again, some of the things that we share with Duffy and now PS really focused on quality, focused on durability, and I'm passionate about building science and about building better buildings. This describes, not the inventor of the triple bottom line, but I think it does describe PS Ventures and our approach and the belief that we can build buildings that are better for people, better for planet, and do so profitably. Shout out also again to Sean Armstrong, Redwood Energy. Sean had asked that I present to a conference that I also highly recommend folks watch, Sean's content, but also to create some content that focused on renters. And so what you're going to see today is a continuation and an elaboration, if you will, on the content that Sean had asked us to ask me to look at and really focus on. And it's the people, and more specifically than even the people, it's the renters, the tenants, also the owners, but occupants of high performance buildings. And I'm going to start this presentation really with a simple premise, that happy renters lead to happy owners. This might be very simple as a concept, but I think it's worth stating and repeating, because I think a lot of time developers and those who are responsible for programming buildings aren't necessarily as focused as we should be on the occupants, namely the tenants and the renters. So how do we get there? How do we get from happy renters leading to happy owners? Well, first, we start with several steps. Happy renters lead to better reviews and more referrals. If you love where you live, you likely tell your friends and family about it. And in today's day and age of lots of online reviews, you write reviews. We also find that if you have a happy renter or tenant, you experience less turnover. You have less vacancy. or also known as higher retention. And for those in the multifamily business in particular, retention is really important. It's generally known that, right, higher retention is a way to increase income and decrease expense. So, and also, if you have happy renters, they're also often able to pay more rent if they're happy, partly because their utility bills are lower. Now, I don't want folks to think that this is just about how do we raise rents on tenants. It's not what this is about. What we're saying is that if you build a building in a certain way and you save energy and it saves utility bills, that it is possible that both the tenant can save money and be happy, and the landlord can also earn more money. Who is the group that's missing out, if you will, in this? It's the utility company. And to me, that's okay. Well, we have better reviews, more referrals. That leads to more demand. We have lower turnover rates, less vacancy, higher retention is lower turnover costs, right? We're not painting the units again, cleaning the carpets, etc. So we have lower turnover costs, and we don't have to spend the money to go procure new tenants. And again, that ability to pay higher rent, if they save utility bills, could lead to higher rent. Not necessarily higher rent received by the owner, not necessarily higher rent paid by the tenant. So we have more demand, lower turnover, and higher rent leads to higher net operating income. And higher net operating income leads to happy owners. So here is our cycle. Happy renters, lower turnover, better reviews, higher ability to pay, right? We end up with more demand for our products, lower turnover costs, lower cost to procure, higher rent, higher net operating income leads to happy owners. So I hope that we've shown that happy renters lead to happy owners. So then the question becomes, how do we make, or how can we make renters happy? And this is a good segue to Passive House. Again, I apologize for some of you. You might be highly familiar, I imagine, with this organization, with what Passive House is. But often the audience that I'm talking to is not terribly familiar. And I think coming at it this way with how we define Passive House is an important element. So for those of you who totally understand Passive House, humor me as we get through some of this, and it'll all come together. So what is Passive House? We generally regard it as the world's most rigorous energy efficiency building standard. And what makes it different from other energy efficiency models is that Passive House focuses on occupant comfort, health, and building energy, driving resiliency, healthy indoor air, and reduced carbon emissions. Okay, so we generally know what it is. And for those of you who first became interested in Passive House on this call, I suspect you went online and did some research to understand what is Passive House. And if you do that survey of readily available information on Passive House, what would we find? You'll see some themes. So we're going to do a quick survey. The three most important things about Passive Houses are comfort, comfort, and comfort, right? I'm just going to pull some excerpts out of these articles. And these, you know, there are various times. Some of these articles are very new. Some are only within a few years, but you'll see some themes emerge. No drafts off the glass, no cold spots, fresh air, right? Less overheating, SIPs energy, low income apartments that set a high standard for energy efficiency, right? Free from noise and air pollution. So not just efficiency, but here we're talking about noise and air pollution, prevents outside temperatures from intruding, energy recovery ventilation system, efficiency, health, a way to cut the health costs for residents who suffer, reduction in energy costs, right? It's a sanctuary, the magic of quiet, low-cost, allergy-free passive housing. Minimal energy, airtight insulation, keep in the heat, clean, fresh, and filtered air, no more smells. Again, clean air, lower electric bills. Comfort would be for everyone. Super insulated apartments, you may never pay a heating bill, tightly sealed, improved air quality, lower utility bills, better air quality, exceptional heat retention. I think we're seeing some themes. Comfortably cool an apartment at an affordable price. How do passive house buildings stay comfortable in summer? Comfortable all year round, much more resilient, right? During periods of hot weather, reduce the heat transfer from outside to inside, helping the building to maintain cooler indoor temperatures. Passive house design is creating a pathway to highly efficient buildings, again, more efficiency. So again, comfort, indoor air quality, resiliency, operating costs, right? Net zero passive houses are the answer to housing energy efficiency, longer lifespan, starting to touch on some other themes, exceptionally quiet spaces. Again, noise mentioned multiple times. Safety and security, even when the power is out, bright, draft-free, consistently warm spaces. Designing for a post-COVID world. So we're getting into some health themes, mitigating the spread of disease, fresh filtered air, again, efficiency, fresh air. Passive house certification should be seen as a powerful tool in your toolbox for providing a healthier, more comfortable, and safer building in our post-COVID world. You get the theme here: superior indoor air quality. There isn't a temperature difference, no stagnant air. This is not all talking about one building. These are various buildings all built to this standard that are all showing some of these same descriptions. So it's clear that homes built to the passive house standard evidence certain characteristics. Here they are. They're quieter, no drafts, fewer pests, fewer odors, no cold spots, lower utility bills, use less energy, controlled humidity, less indoor pollution, lower maintenance, more fresh filtered air, lower operating costs, more stable indoor temperatures, more persistent temperatures during power outages. So we have, I think it's a list of 14 characteristics here that are characteristics of homes built to the passive house standard. And I'd say that these characteristics embody certain desirable qualities. We hear a lot about these qualities lately, and here we've heard some descriptions of buildings, but these qualities to me are comfort, right? Healthy, durable, resilient, efficient. Let's go through them. Comfortable, a lack of nuisance, pain, or unpleasantness in a space, a building that makes occupants feel content and secure. Well, what were some of the passive house building characteristics? Here are the characteristics that I believe meet the definition of comfort, or helping a building to achieve comfort. Namely, quieter, the no drafts, fewer pests. These are all elements that we've heard repeatedly about a variety of buildings built to this standard. And I think we need to start focusing on some of these elements, right? Because some of these comfort elements, right, if you've got high humidity, you can have things like mold growing, things like unwanted smells, uncomfortable temperatures, pests, outdoor pollutants coming in, noise. How many times were those articles reference noise? There's a new one, and you guys in California might be more familiar with this one, but some of the things are new. For example, here in Maryland, is adoption of legalization to some degree of marijuana. But that doesn't mean that you want to smell it all the time in your apartment. Scent is the smell most associated with memory. And so many of you on the phone, myself, I think probably included, have some memory. If you lived in multifamily, of what your neighbor was cooking or what they burned or what happened. And I think we need to start focusing on some of these qualities and valuing some of these qualities in our buildings. Passive houses largely focused on sealing between the inside and the outside, but we can also focus on compartmentalization between homes. Healthy, right? A building that provides for, enhances its occupants' physical, mental, or emotional state, conducive to or associated with good health or reduced risk of disease. Here are some of those passive house building characteristics. You will note that many of them are the same that we heard previously for comfort, right? So in the interest of time, I'm not going to read through them, but also, again, focusing on indoor air quality, the EPA says that the levels of pollutants in indoor air are sometimes 2 to 5 times higher than in outdoor air. So really, we're seeing an importance from an indoor health and indoor air quality perspective of filtering out contaminants, of having constant, low, filtered air. And that's another element of passive house. I added this one to this presentation because I'm respectful of the climate that our friends in California are in. And I've spoken to friends who have experienced some of the smoke associated with the fires that are largely on the West Coast. And you can see folks starting to put together, right? Passive House is even good at addressing keeping the outdoor smoke out. It's that same filtration, that constant filtration. Create a clean room to protect indoor air quality during a wildfire. Wouldn't it be great if the clean room was your house, not just a room? Here we see some studies. Again, this information is readily available on the effects of indoor pollutants on occupants. This is from a study from schools, and the takeaway here is that the air in a passive house building has far less contaminants in it than other construction types, probably because, again, that constant filtered air. Again, we'll get to durability, the ability of a building to maintain over its lifetime the performance for which it was designed. And we would argue that a lot of passive houses is about attention to details, and that attention to detail is largely what helps keep passive house buildings more durable over the long term, especially some of these you see controlling the humidity to reduce risk of condensation, right? Lower maintenance costs also to preserve continued performance with the minimal investment. If it's really expensive to maintain, that could affect the durability of the building if the owners can't afford to maintain it. Resiliency, right? This one's coming up a lot. And you'll see that I've tried to focus on almost all of these have had a renter benefit to them. But the ability of a building to resist and bounce back from adverse scenarios such as power outages, extreme temperatures, and damaging weather. Again, in Maryland, fortunately, right now, we don't have the same incidence of power outages that I understand are being experienced in California. So I know a particular focus on resiliency is important in California right now. And I really want to focus on this idea that there's resisting and there's bouncing back from. Those are actually, there's sort of two concepts buried in there. We'll get to them. But maintaining stable indoor air temperature and resistance to outdoor temperatures is one concept, and then more persistent indoor temperatures during power outages to maintain livability and reduce time to return to normal. If you didn't lose all of your heat or gain your heat very quickly, then you will more quickly be able to return to your normal. Using less energy to maintain systems during periods of energy scarcity. So if we have a limited amount of energy available, wouldn't it be nice if we could go farther with the energy that we have? So whatever the cause, and I think, with a consensus on this for what is causing some of the extreme weather, but whatever the cause, weather has become unpredictable and extreme. These are two screenshots of unseasonably cold weather in Texas in 2021. And we saw a lot of folks became uncomfortable. Homes became uninhabitable. Folks were injured. Several people died in both of these instances. And then historic high temperatures in the Pacific Northwest in June of 21, right? And here you can see just a bloom of heat. Again, a lot of the properties in Pacific Northwest don't have cooling. They're not used to these temperatures. Those homes became incredibly uncomfortable, unsafe, and again, in those heat waves, some people died. So what do we know about passive house? A study conducted in 2020 compared the simulated thermal performance of various buildings during a winter blackout in Duluth, Minnesota, right? And the bottom line is that homes with passive house standard building envelopes and net zero energy buildings maintain safer indoor temperatures for significantly longer than even code compliant new buildings lasting over 6 days before indoor temperatures fell below 40 degrees. As expected, passive house buildings were able to buffer the cold temperatures for the longest during the outage. Getting into that a little bit, what they found is a 90% reduction of severe hours. So there was, they categorize the hours based on sort of comfort levels, here less than 40 degrees. And you can see how long in this slides here on the right, how much longer it took the passive house building to get cold. So in other words, it retained its ability to be comfortable for a lot longer. And that's, so here passive house building number of hours took 152 hours to fall below 40 degrees. as opposed to even just a net zero home at 61 hours. Again, you can put solar on a net zero home, doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to achieve the benefits that we're describing of a passive house. And that is an important thing to understand. And here we see it in graph form as the passive house persists in its temperature and resists that reduction, that change in temperature because of its robust envelope. Efficiency, capable of producing the desired results without wasting materials, time, or energy. The focus of the word is on how little is wasted or lost while the desired results are produced. And again, certain passive house building characteristics which evidence efficiency. I think everybody knows what we're really after in terms of efficiency is a pretty significant reduction in the consumption by a passive house building. So passive house characteristics and synergies. So here we had those 14 characteristics that we discussed earlier. Here they are, the ones that contributed to making the building comfortable. Here, those that contribute to making the building durable, resilient, healthy, efficient. And you'll see we had such a hard time. And again, shout out to PSV team member Will Combs, who's on this call, who helped us visualize this overlap. It's not easy to simply categorize some of the elements of passive house because they're interrelated. And I think this helps show it all together. So here are the characteristics. These 14 characteristics lead to these 5 great, highly desirable qualities. Okay, so if all we need to do is achieve these 14 things to achieve all those great qualities, how do you achieve these things? How do you get these? And that is passive house. The characteristics, the principles of passive house: super insulation, air sealing, thermal breaks, high efficiency doors and windows, balanced ventilation with heat recovery, high efficiency systems and appliance. And again, those are, unfortunately, we still have this messy 2 passive house system, but either is based on the same science and both are focused on these elements. So let's go through those. Well, we said superior or super insulation, right? That's what makes it quieter, reduces the hot spots, lowers the utility bills. And here you can see how the passive house elements flow back to create the characteristics. Air sealing is the most important, in my opinion, and as is reflected here, it impacts every one of the characteristics in one way or another. Thermal breaks, or reducing or eliminating thermal bridges, high efficiency doors and windows, right? And balanced ventilation with heat recovery. And here we have high efficiency systems and appliances to lower the utility bills, lower maintenance, lower operating costs. And here we put it all together to see how these characteristics, right, which are created by these passive house strategies, lead to ultimately these highly desirable qualities. So if passive house is so great, I just finished saying that you get all these 14 fantastic characteristics that lead to all these great qualities. Why don't we see more passive houses around here? And I think the answer is you will. So this is a map from the Passive House Institute of passive house certified buildings. And you'll see that there's a little bit more dot density in other parts of the world, namely Europe. Actually, I just saw a recent map that showed China really increasing its density of dots quite a bit. And you can see in the northeast of the United States some dots coming. There are a few out on the West Coast, a higher concentration in the Pacific Northwest. And so I think you will see it. Here's some a map provided through a FIAS event. And again, I'm sorry I don't have the key, but I believe the key relates to projects that are already certified or those in the process of certification. Again, within the United States, you see that clustering in the Northeast, some in the Pacific Northwest, but growing. And here you see some forward-looking information, again, this time from FIAS, on applications and pre-application, pre-certified buildings. And you see that That's what you call non-linear or exponential growth. Similar shape, by the way, to the electric vehicle curves that are out there, but that's what you're starting to see here. And I think this is a good place to mention, right, that some of the reason you can see high growth like this is that passive house, of course, means not just houses, as everybody on this call probably knows, but you can bring the standard and these methodologies across a variety of product types. And again, I've experienced in many of them. So again, more evidence it's not just houses, and largely I think where passive house I think can do a lot of good is in the multifamily sector. And we just finished discussing earlier about why it's really beneficial to renters and ultimately will be beneficial to owners. And so you see adoption, I think, increasingly in multifamily. This graph from the National North American Passive House Network. So thank you to those folks and Jay for helping direct me to this data. But it's not consistent across the United States. So we saw from the map, here it is in another form, and what you see is that there are certain places where you see peaks, but still a lot of states where there's not much passive house going on, which means not a lot of projects, and therefore probably not a lot of professionals working on those projects, not a lot of exposure. But again, we have Pennsylvania, New York, Massachusetts. And one of the reasons, right, you see it is because passive house is becoming required in places, so or incentivized. So here we see in affordable housing sector, qualified allocation plans. This is the criteria to receive low-income housing tax credits. Several jurisdictions, Pennsylvania, notably on the East Coast, on early adopter, to provide points for passive house. And that spurred interest by developers of affordable housing. And of course, there is not an unknown correlation between affordable housing and passive house, both for reasons like this, but also the high impact of reduction in utility bills, right? That high utility bills are unfortunately most impactful to those of limited means, and they often come at the worst times of year. You end up with a potentially really high heating bill in the winter, right, around when you're trying to buy holiday gifts, and you end up with super high cooling bills in the summer in lots of parts of the country when you might be buying for back to school. And you end up oftentimes with affordable housing historically being older housing stock, which has an energy penalty, just sort of the hidden tax on affordable housing. And so this is not unknown. And so a lot of jurisdictions have incentivized historically high performance building. And we think as the most rigorous standard, passive house has enjoyed its role to play in QAP. Then there are some standouts like New York, who's really on the forefront and has got really organizations like NYSERDA around high performance building. They're really galvanized around improving the building stock in New York, and that's why we saw they have some bigger buildings. That's why you saw that spike in New York. Massachusetts, also another jurisdiction providing incentives to train staff, like to train designers in high performance, right, so that they can bring it to their clients and be familiar with it, and incentives for buildings and incentives for affordable homes. Again, source FIAS here. Several jurisdictions have included FIAS, in this case, they're saying, in energy codes. This is a group of them. So whether it's a stretch code or a bonus code, it's creeping its way in. In our own jurisdiction, where I do most of my development in Montgomery County, Maryland, Montgomery County declared a climate emergency. We have a climate action plan. It calls for all electric buildings and a reduction in carbon and energy usage. Here we see, like, starting in 2030, net zero energy building code. And I'm pretty familiar with at least my own jurisdiction because I participate actively along with some of the feedback groups that the government has requested, our local jurisdiction, incentives for high performance green building, incentives or adoption of building energy performance standards, right? The climate technical work groups for buildings. I've served on some of these groups and really tried to understand what types of buildings our own jurisdiction we're seeking to encourage. And we find that passive house buildings are the types of buildings that meet all of these goals of our local jurisdictions. I'm not the only one who believes that Passive House is coming. Here you see again a survey of articles, Passive Buildings on the Rise from ASHRAE, right? And even the new climate bill, everyone's trying to figure out what the impact of the Inflation Reduction Act is, but what is clear is that it appears to be a lot of money there, and everyone's trying to figure out how to access it. But it does appear to be tied to some resiliency and building performance metrics. And so we should expect that Passive House and high performance buildings will ultimately navigate their way to receive funding. Another one I say, like for those institutional investors out there who sometimes might be, or institutional builders more reluctant to adopt new building standards, I would argue that it's a wise thing to do because it's where a lot of the money is, with metrics, with ESG metrics and a higher attention being paid to where companies are placing and what they're investing in. I would say that having a high performance green building to a Passive House standard makes your building much more marketable, much more in demand than ever before. So here's where I'm going to go off script a little bit, but to say, I hope you agree that it's clear that Passive House is coming. But I think the question is, how quickly will it come and why should it come? And I would like to suggest here today that it will come more quickly if there is less resistance to it. When the development community often hears about new requirements, there is often a knee-jerk reaction in opposition to said new requirements. And I think that if we could reduce the resistance to Passive House by showing that there are a myriad of benefits to Passive House that I've just finished explaining, the comfort, the durability, the resiliency, the efficiency, and that these benefits are in addition to the climate impact of a high performance building and carbon reduction. And I think that very often I see the focus really almost purely being or leading with climate change as the reason for building Passive House buildings. And what I'm trying to say is that that is one of the reasons. And unfortunately, it happens to be a polarizing issue to a lot of folks, not on this call, not me. But I can tell you that to a lot of building owners, once you start with a picture of the burning planet, that you potentially turned off a lot of folks. And that while I agree that it's an outstanding way to address the climate change issues that we face, it's not the only benefit to Passive House. And there are some significant benefits that I've just discussed that accrue whether or not it also helps the environment, which it does. But that shouldn't be the only reason. And if we can convey to everybody all these other benefits and get folks to value these benefits, that we will have a higher likelihood of reducing the resistance to the standard. It will still come, and I think that you'll see that the jurisdictions who have adopted legislation and efforts are being made everywhere. But that graph that showed the states showed that there are a lot of states that aren't making progress there. And I'm not sure that the climate argument is the one that's going to get a lot of those states there, as opposed to bringing out a more holistic, beneficial view of Passive House. So that's my thought on that one. Mm-hmm. So I'm really excited right now to be working on a project called Hillendale Gateway. This is in suburban Maryland. It's on the Capitol Beltway, which is the ring highway that surrounds Washington, D.C. And it's a pretty ambitious project. It's all electric, multi-building, mixed use, mixed income, to be delivered in a single phase and designed to reach the highest levels of sustainability. I couldn't be more proud to be working in partnership with the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County. Again, this is effectively the Affordable Housing Authority in Montgomery County, who's really evidencing leadership. I mentioned there was that climate action plan in our county. Amongst the elements of that plan were the idea that the government would need to lead by example. And Hillendale Gateway is really a way that the HOC is leading by example. They are fortunately partnered with the Duffy family, again, my family, PS Ventures, in letting us lead this incredible project. So Hillendale Gateway is a 2-building program, 163 total homes in 2 buildings, about 1,200 residents, and about 600 low to moderate income Marylanders. And we are also evidencing what real mixed income means here. For a long time, our jurisdiction supplied with what's called an MPDU ordinance. That was the requirement, moderately priced dwelling units. It dictated a certain percentage of new housing for certain size projects needed to be built to a certain affordable level, usually 60% of area median income. But that led to, of course, an increased supply at really that level. It did not address those who made 70% of area median income or 40% of area median income. So with Hillendale Gateway, really HOC is trying a new methodology of truly mixed income. And here you see the mix across the 2 buildings. In Maryland, in our jurisdiction, we have code. I refer to that as code minimum. And again, PS Ventures, we don't develop code minimum buildings. That's just not what we do. We develop better than or above code minimum buildings. There are a myriad of above code minimum standards. The ones that we've been focusing on and are focusing on Hillendale are listed here, right? Energy Star, that most popular and probably recognizable symbol in the market. But there are others, right? Zero Energy Ready, Enterprise Green Communities. Again, we're going to try to achieve a LEED Platinum certification on this building. So we're going to try to achieve Passive House certification, LEED Platinum, Enterprise Green Communities, Zero Indoor. We're going to achieve all of these on Hillendale Gateway. With respect to zero net energy, we are going to try to achieve zero net energy on one of the 2 buildings, on the 155 unit building that I will go back. The building on the left here, to the left of the parking garage, we are going to try to achieve zero net energy in that building. You do not normally see an 11-story zero net energy building because, of course, you don't usually have enough rooftop in one building to supply sufficient power to afford net zero. However, we don't have just one rooftop. We have the rooftop of that building. We have 2 vertical faces of a parking deck, the roof of a parking deck, and a neighboring roof. And we're going to have the entire community solar devoted to that one building, which is a senior building, an age-restricted building. And in that way, the entire property is really supporting the energy needs of that one building. At Hillendale, we're thinking about sustainability in a multi-tiered manner, right? We have foundational at the bottom. These are built in. This is not something we're bolting onto the building. Most of the passive house elements, the super insulation, the air seal, these are not things that are going to change later. They're baked into the fabric of the building. Then above that, we have an active backup layer. That layer is provided by our backup generators. It's to afford the ability for the office, the leasing staff, to continue to operate in the event of a power outage. We've got some emergency circuits. We're actually going to be seeking to do an innovative strategy where while we don't have enough energy to power all units off of our backup generators, we do plan to install a single USB outlet in each unit so that if the power goes out, what do most folks want to do? Maintain connected and charge their phones. And so we do that also to limit the amount of energy that's being able to be drawn off of that system by putting it only on a USB charger, but allow critical systems like telephones, pads, medical devices, small devices that can charge via USB to maintain charge. And then at the highest level, we will be incorporating a resiliency hub, right, which is a dedicated space. This is something being incentivized by our local utility company. We will have the ability to have refrigeration and freezing, things like mother's milk, medications. While resiliency hubs do not often need or aren't required in our jurisdiction to provide for controlled temperatures, because we're building to passive house standard, controlling the temperature is relatively easy and is not a high load. So we will be providing controlled temperature. We'll probably provide emergency food and water and light. And we are investigating making that a microgrid that resiliency hub. So it and likely the emergency load on the entire age-restricted building, that net zero building, that 155 home building, will all be connected to a battery and be able to island. Our approach is to innovate through smart adaptation. We do lots of research, just returned from Germany for my first time attending the Passive House conference in Wiesbaden. Really just so much information out there. And as you can imagine, a jurisdiction has all those dots, has quite a few different buildings and different building types that they have applied these Passive House standards to. So we have a lot we can learn from that's already been done. This is not the first time that any of this really is being done. Push to the leading edge, but not necessarily the bleeding edge. Team, pulling in the same direction. To those members of the Hillendale team who are tuned in here today, thank you. You'll see here in a moment that this cannot happen without a team, but we really use an iterative process. We try to keep it simple. Again, shout out to Sean, who's really focused on this one too. Our air conditioning system, which we'll see here, is a simple 1-to-1. We have 12-story building in the NAR building, a 308 unit building where we are 1-to-1 for air source heat pump, a ducted system, and a 1-to-1 for an air source heat pump water heater. Simple, not a VRF system, not a complex building control system. And we, of course, look at cost as value, not just first cost. Again, fortunate to be partnered with HOC, who shares our approach. And again, it takes a team. Thank you to those members of the team who are on the call, notably NK Passive, Brandon Nicholson, who's on with us, who really helped educate me in my early investigations into Passive House. Sean Armstrong, again, helping me understand electrification a little bit better and where things were in California. But it really does take a team. This is the team that we have assembled, and this is the strength of PS Ventures, is really trying to pull together a team, because you have to try to have everybody pulling in the same direction, and we learn from everybody on the team. For those of you who are interested in how technically we're accomplishing this, in terms of building structure and form, we are at this point building a cast-in-place concrete building. We had tried to use an innovative mid-grade steel system, but that company and that system experienced some challenges during the downturn, during COVID, and for the sake of the project, we switched to concrete. Not ideal, obviously, from an embodied carbon perspective, and on future buildings, we're looking at what we can do to address more embodied carbon. This project has been underway for over 5 years, and as you can imagine, these have been a really busy 5 years for new systems, but that's nonetheless where we are, is cast in place concrete. The HVAC system is individual split ducted, not ductless. We have ventilation as semi-decentralized, so you can go individual HRV or ERV, you can go whole building, or you can go something in between. We are something in between. Water heating, shared and individuals. We have 2 strategies for 2 different buildings. In that age-restricted building, actually all utilities are included, because again, we're devoting all the energy from the solar, or much of it, to that one building. The easiest way to do that in our jurisdiction is through a single meter. That sets us up nicely to include all utilities in that building, and that sets us up to be able to share those hot water. So we've actually applied for a grant to be able to study this a little bit more and understand what the impact is of sharing a single 80-gallon heater across 2 units, not more than 3 bathrooms. And so we're going to get some information that we can share with others. Again, all electric heat pump dryers, induction ranges, best-in-class refrigerators, and again, to dedicate all that roof area to one building and vertical on the garage. And so here we're going to see some other views of Hillendale as we sort of orbit around. That highway in the background is again Interstate 495, also known as the Capitol Beltway around Washington, D.C. To the left in this image, you see the Hillendale Shopping Center, and this was again an asset owned, continued to be owned by members of the Duffy family. So again, very invested in the community. Here we orbit around. You see the solar on the roof. And again, our partner is the Housing Opportunities Commission, and commendably, we do not design the affordable homes any differently than we design a market rate home, which are spread throughout. The affordable units are spread throughout each of the buildings, higher concentration just within the 155 homes because it represents a replacement of a property that was here previously. But we don't concentrate affordable housing into one particular area, and we don't change the specification level of homes within that differ between market rate and affordable. And so here we see some renderings. And I'll end on this slide. The most common question that I usually get, particularly in the development community, is how much more does all of this cost? And I like to say that that's really the wrong question. And I think that the right question is it worth it? If I tell you that something costs more, but don't tell you that there's a savings associated with it, if it costs $100,000 more, but you save $100,000 a year, does it matter that it costs $100,000 more? Also, how much it costs, and I just heard this analogy again used earlier today for those who might have been on the Passive House Accelerator. It's like a call earlier. It's like asking how much is a bag of groceries? Well, it depends on what was in the bag. And I would argue there are a lot of things in these passive house buildings which are difficult to quantify. We went through a lot of them earlier: comfort, resiliency, right? We have to start valuing these things, but it's hard to just put an exact number on them. So here we see resiliency and durability, right? So we have that passive design affords better ability. This is a slide that I put together to sort of take my perspective on where some of these values come from. And this attention to detail, less long-term maintenance. I mean, when we work with Duffy, if we had installed something with an improper detail and it leaked, we had circumstances where we'd be pulling off whole walls of buildings, right? Because water got in, because we didn't necessarily have the attention to detail that a system like Passive House afforded us. And we were doing the best we could. But again, the amount of energy and thought that goes into these Passive House envelopes is pretty extraordinary. And we're focusing on indoor air quality. So a lot of times you see the code starting to get more focused on air tightness, but with air tightness really needs to come ventilation. So this has really already been figured out. In the same way that way back in 2006, I was looking at this saying, like, it's coming, whether it's adopted as a requirement, whether it's integrated into code, this is just coming, is the same way I feel about Passive House. Whether it's adoption of Passive House as a requirement or whether it's adoption of the principles of Passive House into code, once you have this knowledge and you know that it's just a better building to build it this way, you really can't, in my opinion, go back and build it another way. We have the lower energy costs that we mentioned earlier that are impactful to both residents and owners. Code compliance. So this is one, again, a lot of places are looking to adopt some form of Passive House or increased efficiency standards in code. Also, we see delayed timelines for projects. So if you design your building to code minimum, then you will be running a risk that when the code changes and all those energy efficiency standards change, your code minimum building that was already paid for in design is no longer feasible. And so the way that I try to address that is to simply not be building code minimum buildings. If we build all the way up at Passive House, it's a very nice discussion and debate as to whether a jurisdiction should or shouldn't adopt a slightly more efficient code. That's all fine at that discussion. We're trying to figure out how to build it to Passive House, how to build it closer to achieve zero net energy, and to try to do all this for best value, as close to cost parity as we can. Of course, this comes with incentives, as there are federal incentives. We mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, county incentives, state incentives, utility incentives, right? There's organizational identity for PS Ventures, for example, right? This is a good space to be in. I've been doing it for a long time, but it doesn't mean that there's not increased interest in this. And that I think that there are a lot of folks, many of you on this call, who are passionate about this and want to help. That's one of the best things about the Passive House community I found, is the community, is how everybody's collaboratively sharing information, sharing ideas, both what works, but very importantly, what doesn't work. I can't tell you how many things of our design decisions are made because I've spoken to owners of buildings or other designers who did something that just didn't work quite the way that they wanted them to. And we're trying to learn those lessons. And again, that comfort, hard to put a price tag on until you're uncomfortable, and then you'd probably pay quite a bit. But I think that this comfort argument is really helpful in the lease up. It provides that powerful pitch. That comfort is one of the things that makes the building sticky. So people don't want to leave a comfortable building, particularly if they've previously lived in an uncomfortable building, and can lead to better satisfaction overall. So with that, I think we have about 10 minutes for questions. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties to start. I'm really honored to be speaking, my first time speaking before an audience based in California. And so happy to take any questions. And again, to those members of the team who are on this call, on the Hilda team, thank you all. We can't do it without you, and looking forward to answering any questions. And if I can't answer it, there might be a team member on the call who can. So again, someone asked the question of how much more does this cost? An answer to the question is, again, without looking at total value, which we think it exceeds, but I think we're about 3 to 5% of total project hard cost. But again, depending on incentives, and there are paybacks associated with that. At each of the projects, again, because I came at this from a private developer perspective without the affordable housing component, I was always able to show at the end of the day that building high performance was a net positive to the building, not a cost. And again, it does come down to choices. And so, for example, our wall system, and somebody asked about windows. Our windows are a triple glazed window. Right now, we're using a basis of design of a passive house window from a company called Intus, but there are any number of passive house certified windows that achieve the performance standard that we would require. But we're choosing to, for example, not put a brick facade on the entire building. And that's a design choice. We're choosing a simplistic, smaller air conditioning system, which is a savings over a large, complex air conditioning system. So we're trying to make smart choices to put value into the performance of the building, not just into things like shiny granite or stainless steel appliances. Not that we won't have some of those things, but it's not exclusively our focus. Someone asked about hot water. Again, we're using air source heat pump water heaters, all electric. That is a way of hot water, as the person who asked the question correctly pointed out, is one of the most difficult loads. So we're taking the benefit of a heat pump. Those heat pumps obviously tend to provide ancillary cooling as they extract the heat from the air to put it in the water, and they provide ancillary dehumidification, both of which are benefits in a warm, moist climate for much of the year in Washington, D.C., and in a passive house building that can tend to overheat because they're so well insulated. So we have those air source heat pumps breathing not to the units, but actually to the hallway. So we duct the units to the hall, and then we undercut the door. So we breathe in, if you will, from the top, and then undercut the door. And so, yeah, that's our hot water heater strategy. We're not the first ones to use that strategy, and we think that it's a smart use in this application.
Thank you very much, Shane. We really appreciate this. And in closing, I would just like to kind of put a summary there that we're talking primarily about multifamily buildings, and in most cases, affordable multifamily buildings. And the buildings are for the people and for the planet. And the question is really not why would you design and build or retrofit to this high performance standard? The question is, why on earth would you not? So thank you all for being here, for your time and attention. You'll notice there that the only light bulb that is actually lit is the one in the middle, but it is illuminating those around them. And many of you on this webinar are in that position where you are making the difference and spreading the word and the truth the way that it needs to be done. So we thank you for that as well. If you'd like to consider becoming a member or a sponsor, or just learn more about Passive House, the passivehousecal.org webinar address is there. So once again, thank you for your time and attention. Go ahead and take the rest of the day off.